Thank you for joining us for Talking Sleep, a podcast of the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Seema Khosla, Medical Director of the North Dakota Center for Sleep in Fargo. Today's episode is sponsored by apnea. We have been hearing about VCOM from Dr. Bill Noah for a few years. It's a gadget that you place in line with PAP tubing, and it lowers the inspiratory pressure, which seems to make it easier to tolerate PAP therapy. The next evolution of this is the KPAP device. There was an article published in Sleep Medicine a few months ago outlining a randomized controlled trial of KPAP versus CPAP. They found that KPAP was as effective as CPAP in reducing respiratory events, but perhaps was more comfortable and potentially better tolerated. We wanted to learn more and reached out to the authors to tell us about their work. Dr. David White is a former president of the AASM and former CMO for Philips Respironics. He has published extensively on the pathophysiology of sleep-disordered breathing. Dr. William Noah is the inventor of the VCOM, a proof-of-concept device for KPAP. He is the founder and medical director of Sleep Centers of Middle Tennessee. Both are pulmonologists and are here to tell us about KPAP. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
So should we start with VCOM? What is it and how does it work?
Well, we can start there because that was sort of the beginning. So Seema, it was in the spring of 21, right before the recall, that I was approached by the head of one of our, CPAP manufacturers who's not currently on the market. and he was complaining to me. He flew into Nashville he was upset because we used the competitor's mask, but we used their machines and wanted us to use more of their mask. And I said, look, our therapists and sleep techs make that decision with the patients. You need to try to sell them. And I went home that day wondering, I wonder if there's science in that. And I basically built a lab here on my farm, and I started testing equipment. I ordered all the machines and masks from around the world, started playing and started going through old literature. And very quickly, I came up with the idea, why are we reducing expiratory pressure? That's therapy. And why do we have to maintain inspiratory pressure? Because from the literature, that's not therapy, unless you're ventilating somebody. So I had no way to drop the inspiratory pressure. On a bilevel, you can't drop inspiratory below expiratory. You can't drop IPAP below EPAP.
Right.
So I had to invent a way to do it. And the VCOM was my idea. By adding resistance in the circuit, you have high flow during inspiration in the PAP circuit, so it drops the pressure, and you have very little flow during expiration, therefore the pressure is maintained. So that was in April when they came to meet with me, and in middle of July, shortly after the recall of 21, I made the first prototype. I 3D printed it with some engineers here at a local college, and that's where we got started. So we started putting it on people, and then eventually in the spring of 22, we brought it to market and released it APSS in June of 22. So that's how it got started. Now we could do research and we could actually find out if lowering inspiratory pressure is the right thing to do.
So that was pretty fast.
It was pretty fast, but it took me 6 months to believe it myself. Because I was so ingrained. I put, C-Flex or A-Flex or an EPR on everybody. And if they failed CPAP, I'd put them on bilevel. And what I found that was in our own literature in the 90s, and the physics said this, I just found that it was backwards to what, and humans breathe by dropping inspiratory pressure. It's more natural. And it was quite shocking.
So how did this lead to KPAP?
Well, once I knew that it was safe to drop inspiratory pressure and I began to get all this comfort data with the VCOM, I had this idea in my head, even going back to the previous summer, that I could engineer it into the machine. But there's issues because you can't drop inspiratory pressure too much when you're breathing in initially because you're not going to be able to draw your breath in. So I did all kind of experiments testing what were the right drops, what was the most comfortable, and then you have to return the pressure eventually to therapy. People do need that same pressure setting that you put them on CPAP, but they only need it towards the end of expiration. So there was all kind of studies done to determine what the right timing was of all that. And then eventually, brought in top engineers in the field, and we built the first prototype KPAPs and began to let people breathe on it and to get more data with the KPAP algorithm. And then I reached out, like anyone should in the sleep field. When you think you have something, you go to David White.
So what does the K in KPAP stand for?
Well, it stands for Kairos.
Okay.
Kairos is the transliteration from the Greek. And we don't have a word like Kairos in English. We have the word time, but we don't have a single word that means the precise or the exact time. And that's what Kairos means. And so Kairos PAP is not continuous PAP. It's sort of tri-level, but
Okay.
it actually only supplies the therapy at the precise time you need it, which is towards the very end of expiration, because that's what determines the cross-sectional area of the airway when you breathe in, and that determines in expiratory lung volume and increases the stiffness of the walls of the pharynx.
So tell me about the data. I mean, what data do we have to support what you're doing?
I think I'll let David answer that since he was first author on the study.
Yeah, there are fairly much two questions you'd want to ask about a new technology like this, or probably three questions, two of which we've answered. One is, the obvious one is, do you lose efficacy when you drop the inspiratory pressure and keep it down during most of expiration? And we've done two studies now, one of which you mentioned, the one we published in Sleep Medicine, but I'll tell you about both of them. The first one was pretty straightforward. We basically got patients, good CPAP users, brought them in for a single night in the lab and randomized half the night to regular CPAP at the 95% determined the pressure on their device. One night it was CPAP and the other night was CPAP with KPAP. And we basically looked at sleep and we looked at respiration and whatnot. And basically the apnea-hypopnea index, both AHI-4 with 4% DSAT criteria and the AHI-3A with 3% or arousal, both of them were exactly the same. Were actually slightly lower, but not significantly or clinically importantly lower on the KPAP algorithm than the standard CPAP algorithm. So we knew that had reasonable efficacy. The second question was, which one's more comfortable? So then we brought in 150 totally PAP naive patients and tried them at two pressures, 9 and 13 centimeters of water on CPAP and KPAP. And we did it just like an ophthalmologist does it. If you've ever been there, they show you with one set of lenses versus another, and just simply say, this one's better or that one's better. And you could go back and forth. And we tried it. And to summarize, about 94% of the time, they picked KPAP at one of the drops. Not everybody liked the full possible drop. Some people liked lesser drops. But again, 94% of the time, they liked a KPAP algorithm to a CPAP algorithm. So we decided that it was more comfortable. Now, we did that study on CPAP because we did not at that time have an APAP algorithm that would run with KPAP. We subsequently have developed that, and we just finished a trial that we're using it for our FDA submission, our 510K submission, comparing a full night of the Philips APAP versus our own APAP algorithm with KPAP in addition to it. And basically, it came out exactly the same. I mean, the AHIs were virtually identical, both AHI-3A and AHI-4 on the two devices. So we know that the efficacy is the same. We're completely comfortable with that. We know that novice people find it more comfortable. We have not yet done is a full-out adherence trial to show whether this added comfort and what does end up leading to better use. And that's something we will do. It'll have to be a substantial trial, with either a 6-week crossover or probably a 3-month parallel group. We hadn't quite decided yet, but that's in the works. But we're comfortable right now. Similar efficacy, greater comfort. Hopefully that would lead to better acceptance and then hopefully better adherence. But we'll learn that probably in the next year.
So it's interesting to me that these are all PAP naive patients. What happens if you take somebody who is usually on CPAP and adherent and put them on KPAP?
Well, with VCOM, we found that about 80% prefer the VCOM, long-term users, when we were
Mm.
gathering data on it. There's, a certain percentage, and they're probably heavier people that like that inspiratory pressure. They've gotten used to it. Comfort with breathing is based a lot on how you normally breathe. People are very sensitive. So any change in how you breathe kind of makes people aware or can make them anxious. So once you're used to the, higher inspiratory pressure, well, you may prefer that. With KPAP, like we said, we're not really sure. We haven't looked at that. We can tell you that most everyone who breathes on it, even if they're a CPAP user, they prefer it.
Mm. So you mentioned something about putting all of your patients on EPR or AFlex or CFlex.
Not
And then,
anymore. I stopped that 3 years ago or 4.
So that's what I'm wondering, because I've also heard you talk about treatment-emergent central apneas and how this really wasn't a thing until we started utilizing CFlex or EPR. So tell me about this.
Well, it was a thing. Treatment emergent, of course, is the symptom of the underlying problem of the high loop gain sleep apnea. But what was causing it to, come to the surface is probably augmented tidal volume. No matter how high your loop gain is or how small your CO2 reserve, you still have to increase ventilation to blow below it and create a central apnea, get below the threshold. So had this idea actually in the fall of 21 when I was playing with VCOM that it's likely that, we know that bilevel causes much more central. In fact, central sleep apnea was originally called hyperventilation apnea. And so we know that exists. So it makes sense that the small amount of pressure support that you get with EPR or with AFlex could be pushing some people over. In other words, augmenting their tidal volumes. And so it would increase the likelihood. And there was an abstract a few years ago showing that you had increased central apnea with CFlex or AFlex on. So the thought was, if we knock down inspiratory pressure, like we're doing with VCOM or with KPAP, that we wouldn't augment tidal volumes with PAP. We know even CPAP augments tidal volumes when they're awake. And so the thought was, well, maybe VCOM would resolve Texas. So we have an article coming out next month in JCSM. Robert Thomas actually wrote an editorial about it. It's coming out with it, showing that in a case series, we were able to resolve TEXA with VCOM in every case.
Oh, wow.
By dropping inspiratory pressure.
I don't know if you remember, there was a ventilatory mode called PAP, proportional assisted ventilation, that magged the units. It basically is just turning up the gain in the system. And you can turn it up, and you can make anybody have continuous central cycling apneas if you just turn the system up. And it's just providing pressure support. And so everybody, even people who have a low loop gain, can be made to cycle if you give them enough extra pressure support. And so EPR and CFlex and all that are just small amounts of pressure support. And they'll make people cycle that are close to cycling on their own.
So let's take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about KPAP. You're listening to Talking Sleep from the American Academy of Sleep Medicine.
Dive deeper into the future of sleep apnea therapy with the Apria Sleep Care program. Once we receive the PAP referral, our team springs into action, offering patients a seamless transition into therapy. Patients start by selecting how they want to begin their sleep journey: in-person care, virtual care, or self-directed care. With ongoing therapy support, including coaching, digital resources, and video assistance, we're committed to ensuring every patient's success. We stay connected with our patients with live calls, texts, emails, and IVR, all designed to make adherence a breeze. And with our supply schedule program, replacements are delivered like clockwork. Experience the difference of an enhanced sleep therapy program with Apria Healthcare. Discover more about our innovative sleep program online today at apria.com.
Welcome back to Talking Sleep. We're talking with Dr. Noah and Dr. White about the newest PAP modality, KPAP. So, do you think there's a lot of CO2 rebreathing with our current devices?
Well, at low pressures, it looks like there is. Like when I started testing all the equipment 3 years ago, it's one of the first things I started playing with as well. Is I had CO2 tanks and a lung simulator, and I had all kind of fun down here.
Oh
Seema.
my goodness.
And it's interesting in all the package inserts of all the masks, they say something like, as with all masks, some rebreathing occurs at low pressure, and we know that's true because the pressure in the circuit determines how much air is coming out the little holes in the mask, which we call the exhaust port. And you have to have enough exhaust to get rid of all your exhaled volume, or it's going to go down the tube towards the machine and you're going to breathe that back in your next breath. And that's what rebreathing is. There's two types. There's dead space rebreathing. Obviously, the more dead space you add by putting the exhaust port further away from the mouth or nose, that's area that you have to breathe. It's like making your trachea longer, okay?
Mm.
But the concern is what's called circuit rebreathing. And circuit rebreathing is when your expiratory flow exceeds the exhaust flow, and therefore it has to go towards the machine. And then if you don't have time for that to clear out the exhaust port before you breathe in again, you're going to breathe in that air that's already humidified, it's got as much as 5% CO2, and that the oxygen in it is reduced as much as 5% or more. So that's what it is. And so at low pressures, larger people are going to rebreathe.
Mm.
It kind of depends on the mass, depending on the exhaust flow. For instance, in general, ResMed and React and FP have more exhaust in there. They have more holes, you could say, assuming it doesn't get wet. And then the Philips mask. Philips tends to have a little less exhaust. But at high pressure, that's better because you really only want enough exhaust to get rid of your exhaled gas. When you get to 15 centimeters of pressure, all that, because you have so many holes, you're blowing on your spouse or your bed partner. And so it's only an issue at low pressures. And I guess we had this paper in Sleep Medicine came out, I think in September, a few months ago, showing rebreathing with masks.
So will your new devices with KPAP then have an algorithm to prevent rebreathing?
Well, yes, we did. That was the other thing that the KPAP machine, the machines with the KPAP algorithm will have, is developed with the engineers a couple of years ago. And I found an algorithm on the device where that can't happen. In other words, you don't have to worry about it as a provider. It's kind of embarrassing because, when I found this out, I was thinking back to these football players I had treated over the years, and they would come in whining and complaining that they were anxious and short of breath, and they're only like 5 or 6 centimeters. And I got these little ladies, that are tolerating 10 or 12, and and I was ignorant. I just didn't know that they were rebreathing. And if I'd turned them up a little bit, they probably could have done fine with CPAP. So it is an issue. And with this new algorithm, you don't have to worry about it because the machine, when it senses rebreathing based on the flows, actually it calculates it into volume, but it will up the pressure. So say you're on 5 and it detects the person is rebreathing, it'll up the pressure like to 6 or maybe even 7. Once you get to above that, it's 8, it's very unlikely that they're going to rebreathe.
So I've noticed that you say devices with KPAP algorithm. So KPAP is not a separate device?
No, it's an algorithm that can go on. We can put really on any machine. I mean, obviously we're bringing our own device to market with the KPAP algorithm, but you can just turn it off. Our device, if you want them on CPAP, you turn. KPAP's just an option. You can turn it off.
Okay, that makes sense. So
the CO2 algorithm you can turn off too.
Okay. So are there patients who we shouldn't use KPAP on?
Anybody that needs ventilation, mechanical type ventilation, KPAP is the exact opposite of that. It is not going to provide pressure support or any ventilation. So anybody like with COPD or obesity hypoventilation syndrome or chest wall kyphoscoliosis, any of those type of individuals, it'd be contraindicated because they need the IPAP to be higher than the EPAP, such that you're actually, breathing for them and reducing their work of breathing. So that's the only ones that it's really an issue.
So walk me through how this works. You've talked about inspiratory pressure being lower. And you also mentioned sort of jokingly that it's almost like tri-level. So walk me through like what that means. What am I receiving when I'm wearing it?
Okay, so let's say you're in end expiration. All right,
Mm-hmm.
so you're at the therapy pressure you need with CPAP. Say it's 10 centimeters. Okay.
Okay.
As soon as you start to breathe in a flow-dependent manner, I mean, it's a curved drop, actually almost exactly like the VCOM, you're going to drop 2 centimeters of pressure. So you would go from 10 to 8. And then when you hit peak inspiratory flow, where you've really established your breath, we drop 3 more centimeters. All right, so now you're down to 5. And that can be adjusted. Both those drops are adjustable on the machine. Or you can have what's called auto set, where the machine just adjusts to the maximum drop. One thing to note, the pressure can never get below 5. So if you're on 8, the maximum drop would be 3.
Oh, okay. That's good to
1
know.
and 2.
Okay.
So it never goes below 5. But we have plans in the future to change all this. But we have to redesign a bunch of other things, which I can't get into right now. So there's going to be a lot more changes coming. But for right now, you drop 5. Now, the key to KPAP is the fact, and on our estimation, David and I, it's not just dropping inspiration. It's the fact that you're 5 centimeters down when you cross over into expiration. And so you don't have to exhale against the pressure to trigger a drop. It's already down 5 centimeters. And so you can exhale, the lung can recoil more naturally. And that's what's so comfortable about it. And then after you reach peak expiratory flow and you're dumping the end of your volume, then the pressure slips up to the therapy pressure, back up to 10, and stabilizes the airway, achieves end expiratory lung volume for the tracheal tug to stiffen the walls of the airway, and you got your therapy. And what's really cool is a whole new concept in ramp, in that we have something called a K delay.
Okay.
That the later you raise the pressure up in the end of expiration, the more comfortable it is for more people. But, it's not therapy, we found, in everyone if you do it at the end. Most, but not all. So that's why we do it right after peak expiratory flow. And so that's where it's set to raise the pressure up, because we found that was therapy in everybody. But the K delay button is on the machine. You push it, and for 20 minutes, it'll push it out till later in expiration to make it even more comfortable to when you're trying to fall asleep.
So kind of like a ramp.
Kind of. It's a timing ramp. Yeah, a timing.
So how does managing, what's different about managing KPAP? Like if I have somebody on CPAP of 10, do I just put them on KPAP of 10?
The answer would be yes.
Okay.
You do it exactly the way you're doing now. You're going to set either your APAP variables or the CPAP at exactly the same pressure you did before. And our APAP algorithm will work exactly like any other APAP algorithm that you've ever seen. You set it up the same way. So KPAP is not something that doctors are going to have to learn a different way of doing things or a different way of titrating. They will have to think about things differently, but the setup will be identical to what you normally do with continuous or automated PAP control.
What about bilevel PAP? Like if I have someone on 12/8, can I switch them over to KPAP?
You cannot.
Okay, good to know.
You think, BiPAP is part of the problem. We were trying to get around BiPAP. BiPAP, again, is lowering the expiratory pressure, which is letting the airway close. It's not reducing your end expiratory lung volume, which is everything's contributing to airway collapse. And so actually we decided on the machine we're not even going to have a BiPAP mode, or at least not a BiPAP S mode that you would use for sleep apnea, because we don't think that's the right way to take care of the patient. So you cannot have BiPAP and KPAP running simultaneously.
Okay, that's your line in the sand.
Well, that's what we missed. The bigger issue is not KPAP. KPAP's an answer we came when we realized that we were just wrong. In the first article on bilevel in 1990, when bilevel couldn't open the airway, that should have clued us right then that the pressure, when you're on bilevel 8/12, it's not 12 in the airway.
Mm.
I mean, 12/8, excuse me.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm so used to lower inspiratory pressure. But yeah, but that's we should have realized right then, and then all that literature in the 90s that we show in our lectures, to where the airway is getting smaller, where when you drop the EPAP, and you're and the IPAP does not open the airway. All you're doing when you go like from CPAP of 10 to bilevel of 12/8, you just decompensated the airway. You just destabilized it. You made it smaller. You lowered lung volume. Then what you do to that unstable airway, you're jamming air over the obstruction that we just caused. That's all we were doing, was forcing flow over obstruction. And now we know the right way.
2025 marks the 50th anniversary of the AASM. Here is Dr. Karskadin telling us about the origins of the MSLT.
One of the other things Dr. Dement was interested in was the REM, non-REM sleep cycle. And he had a hypothesis that if we were awake, substituted awake for REM, we wouldn't need REM sleep anymore. And so he had some undergrads start doing what he called a 90-minute day. Be awake for 60 minutes, sleep for 30 minutes, again and again and again, 16 times around each 24 hours. His hypothesis was they wouldn't have REM sleep in any of those 30-minute little naps. And indeed, we did find that not only did they have slow wave and non-REM sleep in these naps, they would also have REM sleep. And we saw variability that was predictable in the sleep latency. And they were having REM sleep within those 30-minute naps. So, maybe this would be a way to measure both sleepiness and the appearance of REM sleep early on during sleep as a way specifically to look at people with narcolepsy and see if we could diagnose it. At the time, the lab test was a longer nap. And this was mostly Friedrich Roth, who was in an Eastern European country. And he was using this and crafting several parameters from the single daytime nap that he used to characterize an individual as having narcolepsy or not. And one of the things, at least what I saw when I read his work, was that he would have a lot of false negatives. So the patients who had a clear, set of symptoms that would make you think they have narcolepsy wouldn't manifest the REM sleep onset in that single nap. And so, working with Bill, we thought, well, let's give them more than one nap. Let's do the multiple sleep latency test.
Now back to our conversation. So when can we expect to see KPAP on the market?
We believe that it will be out sort of in the September timeframe, August, September, October, sometime in Q3 of this year,
Okay.
it will become available.
And I have to ask you this because I think we're all a little bit bruised from the Philips recall. Will it have foam?
No foam, zero foam, and at least if quiet, as not slightly quieter than the ResMed device. And so, no foam and equal quietness. So that will not be a problem.
Is it because it's lower pressure? Why is it quiet?
Well, actually, that's a great question. So the way you test it for the sound level is you put them at 10 centimeters, and they have these elaborate microphones all around. So running our device at 10 centimeters of CPAP is how you would measure that.
Okay.
So we're, comparable, or, it's not enough difference to, but we're the same at 10 centimeters of CPAP. When you turn it to KPAP, because the pressure is up to 5 centimeters less, it's going to be quieter.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But even at 10 centimeters of water, it's not louder.
Yeah.
Even though there's no foam.
Yeah. So we're remember, there's two things. We're bringing a whole new device and mask and everything to market to compete with who, and but what's unique and what we believe is revolutionary is the KPAP and the CO2 algorithms.
I love how those who shall not be named. So I
Name
heard
that
you
shall
say.
not be spoken.
So, will you have a titration device that we can use in the lab?
That is our plan. We hope to have that about the same time, maybe a month later.
Okay. And so then we can try KPAP during titrations.
Yes, yes. And these devices would, also have your other algorithms you would titrate, like ASV.
So they would have CPAP, bilevel PAP, ASV,
Yes, yes. And of
KPAP.
course, KPAP you would only use, in the CPAP or APAP mode.
Okay. And then what about masks? I think you said a little something about you were going to have masks as well.
Yes, we're excited about that. We have some new innovation in masks that are going to come to market. So we're even in the way we introduce them to patients, some new ideas. It's sort of the field's been sort of controlled by engineers for the last probably 30 years, and we're looking to change that. We think that physicians and providers should be in the middle of all that. And I think some of these things have happened because we weren't involved. I never really paid any attention to it. I mean, other than what I thought therapy was, the pressure.
Yeah.
I did kind of want most people on nasal pillow masks because of the science behind a nasal pillow. But other than that, we let other people make that decision. We don't do that anymore in our practice.
Oh, so that's what you mean by the way you introduce patients to the mask.
Yes, yes.
Oh, so a little bit more collaboration maybe in clinic and more knowledge about what masks they're using and, pros and cons of each one, that sort of thing?
Well, we need to all learn kind of how we should choose a mask. So, choosing a mask should start with the surface area of the mask. You want the smallest surface area because, that surface area determines the force it's pushing it away from your face. Okay, so if a full face mask has 30 times the surface area of a nasal pillow, it has 30 times the force wanting to fly off your face. It also is harder to seal because it's got a more linear seal line. And the more length there is, the greater chance of leak. So, a nasal pillow wins in all these categories. But the problem is when they put the mask compensation algorithms on the machines back in 2010, Philips did, and everyone else copied them. Well, then they started jacking up the pressure on a nasal pillow mask, turning it into a pressure washer in the nose. And the Philips engineers said they never even tested on patients. They certainly didn't tell their chief medical officer, who's sitting next to me right here. And so, where were the doctors involved? They basically, made a nasal pillow mask harder to wear because they did it because of the resistance in the mask, which was dropping inspiratory pressure. But they believed that inspiratory pressure was therapy and you couldn't drop it. And so that's why they put those algorithms on that made it harder to tolerate.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it's there's all kind of cool science in the mask, but I never knew that till I sat down here and started playing 4 years ago. So the next thing you want to know about the exhaust flow, we talked about that. And the final thing would be the resistance. A nasal pillow cushion has a lot of resistance in it, and that can be good, but it can make it harder for patients initially sometimes to tolerate it because when you breathe out, you breathe against that resistance and you build back pressure. So it's flow dependent. It's in the early part of expiration, but that can make a difference. In general, because it would drop inspiratory pressure, that resistance, it could make it better at high pressures, but more difficult at low pressures. There's just a lot in there that I never thought about until a few years ago.
I mean, Seema, it's interesting because we as pulmonologists are used to ventilating people, and ventilating people is all IPAP. And I think we just got stuck on IPAP as being, an essential thing, and helping people breathe with more IPAP can't be a bad thing. Was sort of the logic that went into all of this. And expiratory pressure, uncomfortable breathing out against positive pressure, that's not natural. So, I mean, I think it's pretty easy to understand how we got to where we are, even if it didn't turn out to be biologically correct.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair. And it sounds like you did a really deep dive into sort of relearning physics and probably calculus and all of that.
Yes.
Bill, I'll tell you, Bill was doing that. When I was at my days at Phillips, I was trying to get us past CPAP altogether.
Yeah.
I mean, I've made it at my job in life to get to a totally other therapies, be they pharmaceutical or device. And Bill was sitting in here trying to figure out a way to make CPAP better. And it never occurred to me that I would ever get involved in anything like that. And when he called me up originally, he said he had a new way to do CPAP. I was not one whit interested, I must say. And then he convinced me to let an engineer fly out the very next day and put me on this thing. And once you breathe on it, you know the difference. You just say, this is not the same at all. And it convinced me. But
So it kind of shocks me to hear that, though, that you were trying to get away from CPAP.
Yeah, no, that's been doing it my whole life. I tell the story, I don't know if you ever heard it, when I was 1995, I was giving a talk at an advanced course down in Adelaide, Australia, and I was talking about the future of sleep medicine. So think about this in 1995, 25 years ago. And I said at that time, if CPAP's still the same way we're treating sleep apnea in 20 years, we will be a failed field, a failed field. And Colin Sullivan was there, and he stood up and he says, David, you're completely wrong. He says, in 20 years, CPAP will be as comfortable as glasses. And when I tell that story, I say we were both wrong. We were 25 years out, and CPAP is still the main way we treat sleep apnea. We're definitely not a failed field, but it is not nearly as comfortable as glasses. And KPAP won't make it as comfortable as glasses, but it'll make it a lot better.
I don't know. I hate my glasses, so. And I think we're at 30 years now, if I'm doing the math right.
Yes.
So, Dr. White, do you think we've been doing it wrong all of these years?
I do. I think we've been doing it wrong since CPAP first came out, which is, 1985 was the first machine. But that doesn't discourage me or upset me one way or the other. Science is a continuous evolution of knowledge. And we thought we were doing it right when we started dropping expiratory pressure. We did it because that made logical sense, even though it biologically turned out to be wrong. As I look back on all the things that we were doing that turned out to be wrong, I mean, things like beta blockers were absolutely forbidden in the treatment of heart failure forever. And then all of a sudden, now you're not being managed if you're not on a beta blocker. I mean, there's endless things like that. And so we have just learned something new. We're going to do things differently going forward. And no one in the field should feel guilty or feeling like they did something wrong or that we should have known this. It's just that's the way science evolves. And I think it's very interesting that Bill was one that found it. Here's a guy, that's basically a private practice guy in his basement tinkering away, although some of the best things ever discovered were done under that sort of circumstance. But again, the field shouldn't feel upset that we did things probably incorrectly. It's just we didn't have the knowledge, we weren't smart enough, and science moved on. So I think we're in a better place right now, and hopefully going forward we'll do things better.
But isn't that the great part about our field? I mean, each of us can contribute to the field and to, this body of knowledge and learn from one another.
And sleep's such a new field too, and there's still, sort of infinite numbers of things to learn about sleep. So sleep is going to be fun for a long time.
And our field is unique that we have so many different specialties involved.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think that's part of the beauty of it, right? We have this lovely tapestry of voices that all have different experience and expertise and background. And so I kind of love that we all live under this big tent where we can continue to learn from one another and really stand on, the shoulders of those that came before us.
Yeah, the different specialties can help other specialties in difficult patients in a particular domain. Yeah, because I'm not going to be nearly as good as helping a sleep patient that's badly depressed as I am one that's in respiratory failure.
Or how many times do you have to, ask your friends? Like for me, I'm a pulmonologist. And so if I see a wonky EEG, the first thing I do is I get one of my neurology friends to look at it.
Exactly.
So will you have a monitoring program like AirView then?
Absolutely. We've spent all day talking about it. We probably spend more time talking and working on that than we do the machines, because KPAP, it was finished 2 years ago. It's just getting machine to market. Well, I guess getting machines to market. But the big thing is is the cloud program. And our cloud program, if you're going to take the market, you're going to have the best, because that's what the providers work in all day. Really and a lot of them don't want to be in 3 different cloud programs.
Right.
They want to have one. So we understand that to take the market, we're going to have the best cloud program.
Oh, so, Dr. Robert Thomas talked to us about the importance of being able to look at the waveforms. Are we going to be able to do this on your platform?
Absolutely. And it's going to have the Dr. Thomas seal of approval.
Wow, that says a lot. So, Dr. White, any key takeaways for us?
Not that really that we hadn't said already. I mean, I just think that patients are going to need to get exposed to this. They're going to need to try it, and hopefully, they'll end up finding more comfortable. One of the hardest things, and I don't even know how to do it, is to test whether something like KPAP leads to better acceptance of CPAP. I mean, because new people coming down the line, they're not going to have ever breathed on regular CPAP, so they're not going to know that this is better. This is going to be their initial exposure to it. And hopefully that will lead to more people finding it acceptable and more people then ultimately using it down the road. Doing a study to try to show improved acceptance is not a straightforward thing to design or do. So what we'll end up doing is certainly hopefully showing better adherence. But my hope is that more people will be able to tolerate it. Because, I mean, like I said, I'm working on all kinds of other things, from 3 drug companies, or at least 3 or 4 new drugs coming out, the new stimulation algorithms coming out and whatnot. But all of them don't treat people very completely. I mean, the APneas study that came out a few years ago with their Mariposa study, I mean, the average drop in AHI was about 47%. And not, it's just, that's good, it's helpful, and it was tolerable. But it's not what PAP can do if it's tolerated. So, we're excited to bring something that hopefully a lot more people can use and be completely treated and use it all night.
That's fair. Dr. Noah, any key takeaways for us?
I would just say that that it was quite a shock to me when I realized how I was treating everyone wasn't always in their best interest when I saw this. Now, we have nothing to be embarrassed about, because, our guidelines said to do this. I mean, we just sort of missed it. And it's not that we weren't treating people. People are being treated with CPAP.
Right.
It's just so much of the pressure we're giving them is just unnecessary. And that's going to be the difference. And I can tell you, in our practice, everyone's going to get a machine with KPAP on it. Now, there might be 4% who prefer CPAP and will turn it off. But I just, we know also that it reduced the leak by more than 50%. We obviously think it's going to, decrease the side effect of central sleep apnea associated with positive airway pressure. So we can't find anything really wrong with it. You just don't use it in people who need ventilation.
And that makes sense. That's logical. That makes sense. Well, thank you both for joining us today and for helping us better understand this new technology, and for helping us be better prepared to manage our patients on this modality.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Talking Sleep, brought to you by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. For more podcast episodes, please visit our website at aasm.org. You can also subscribe through your favorite podcast service. And if you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a rating or review. For more feedback or suggestions, email us at podcast@aasm.org. I hope you'll join us again for more Talking Sleep. Until next time, this is Seema Khosla, encouraging you to sleep well so you can live well.